We are live. I hope the sound is okay. There was some, as always, a lot of tinkering and retooling and setup to do every one of these episodes, and I hope it's clear. You can see this picture behind me, and I hope Laurie, our producer, and Chester are around. Enormous help on this show. This is, of course, Journey of an Aesthete podcast. I'm the host, Mitch Hampton, and this is going to be another book lunch series. When we last met, we were covering the author John Updike, which I really enjoyed, and we're going to have another J, Joan Didion. And the planning of this series took some twists and turns over the past month. I had initially, a long time ago, had wanted to discuss just Joan Didion, perhaps with a little bit of EveBabitz, or maybe a lot of EveBabitz. And that's that's something that will always continue to interest me. But there was a major release in the literary world, I think connected with New York Public Library this past year, of private personal diaries of Joan Didion. And this was not, of course, authorized by Joan Didion because it's posthumous, but it's okay to publish, even though there's, of course, a long, and will be continuing on debate over the ethics of that, even though it was never explicitly forbidden. And this is a really, not to get sidetracked by complex historical, sociological, critical issues. From the point of view of our series here, which is an aesthetic series, and it's a series about prose above all, and books, I'm not interested, of course, so much in those questions, but I'm interested above all, as you see behind us here, in the poetry of things and language. And after all, we are dealing today, as we did with John Updike, with one, I can't praise her enough, one of the giants of 20th century prose. And not only her husband, John Gregory Dunne. And so how the show changed is that when this book was released, this is the book here to which I refer, Notes to John. And these notes are from the early 2000s, right around the time of September 11th. So roughly 1999, 2000, 2001, those years of a very, very far apart, distant era from our own. Writing to her therapist and her daughter, Quintana Roos, therapist, psychiatrist, about personal, intimate family matters. And a lot of that is this period. And so I just wanted to hold up this book because this is Joan Didion. This is a really great portrait of her where she wrote. It's her study, her office. You could see her computer there, her sitting in front of her, where she wrote. She was an author. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful packaging to do this with the book. We're going to consult this book, but we're not going to consult it from the point of view of getting at the final truth about what kind of human being Joan Didion was, what kind of mother she was, or what kind of person her daughter Quintana was, ultimately, or her husband, or this very illustrious family. Because it's a vast family with you talk about talent inside a family. This blows away many other prominent families. I mean, it's just I don't even know where to begin, but we're gonna touch on that as the series goes on. So I changed course. I said, instead of having 2 episodes, 3 episodes, I'm going to do 4 episodes, and we're going to discuss Joan Didion's, in the main, Joan Didion's, one of her last works, Blue Nights, which is sort of a follow-up to Magical Thinking. She starts working on that the same time as she's writing Magical Thinking, because the deaths of her adopted daughter and her husband were very close together in time. And so, although this book deals with the early 2000s, we're getting towards the end of Joan Didion's life. The mid-2000s, 08, 09, and then, of course, the public library, Alyssa Wilkinson, enormous research that she's done in this regard. We're gonna be consulting her to some. But I wanted to start off with a little different for us. I'm not at my piano. We're starting off with a clip. We've shown clips before, but I thought, the best way to enter into Joan Didion and John Gregory Dunne. Well, hold on for a second. So these are the texts. All right. Getting my stuff here. This is Blue Nights in one of the sort of a standalone edition, and that's daughter Quintana. We are going to cover her husband John Gregory Dunne, but we're going to focus on one work in particular, one text. For reasons that will become clear maybe now or as we get into it. This is being re-released this year, so I have a first edition from the 70s, and that's Vegas. And this is John Gregory Dunne. And of course, this book very much connects. If it connects to anything on our podcast, it connects to my series on 70s cinema, movies and TV, because the theme of this book, him temporarily separating from Joan Didion and going on a wild, very male-oriented journey in doing reporting on Vegas in the 70s, it mirrors some things that Joan Didion was doing in Play It As It Lays. So I'm reminding myself that we're gonna talk about some of these things. So this is the book. But in order to talk about these two, we got to talk about a whole bunch of other stuff. We got to bring in Griffin Dunne and the crime writer, true crime writer, Vanity Fair reporter, DominickDunne, and some other folks. Tom Wolfe even. After all, Joan Didion is one of the founders, if I can put it this way, one of the founders of her own genre, of a new journalism, and there's a handful of them. Tom Wolfe, of course, Gay Talese, and Joan Didion, and some others. And this was a way of, if I could put it this way, new journalism was an attempt to call into question boundaries and categories of prose. So, for example, the question between objectivity and opinion. Or, above all, the difference in prose between repertorial journalistic prose and poetry and fiction. These writers began to use the elements of high literary art even poetic tropes and rhetoric, but in the context of writing about actual factual reporting. And that really had not been done before. And so there's that. But we're going to start off as we like to do, some time travel. We're going to go back to 1977. Don't do this to me. They always love to Let's go. Don't love on me. We're going to go back to San Francisco, 1977. This is from the wonderful folks at the Poetry Center Archive Go Live. It's a channel. And this is Joan Didion, her very first public appearance. Long before any of the stuff we've been talking about. Long before her celebrity, hipster, millennial, iconic status, the Celine ads, advertisements, and the, before the 2000s. She was already quite famous in the literary highbrow world, as you'll see. But she hadn't crossed over into being this sort of major celebrity yet. And she hadn't read in public. And so I want to go back to, so this is 1977 San Francisco. This is the world of the underreported, sort of not, under the radar art communities of California. Joan Didion, of course, and her husband lived both in New York City and California at different times in their life, back and forth, and that's its own story. But I just want to get the sense of 1977, this little poetry center she's reading, and this is another interesting connection, the Cesar Chavez Center. And if you know her husband's work, if you know the work Delano, which is her husband's, John Gregory Dunne's wonderful portrait of the grape strike and Mexican workers' struggle in the 60s. That's where that center's named after that political activist that John Gregory wrote about. So let's just go back in time, and I'm going to play this uninterrupted. So this is covered under our old friend, the Copyright Act of 1976. The material is used for the purpose of commentary and criticism, and it falls under the fair use doctrine of copyright law. There is no copyright infringement intended whatsoever. We're going to time travel. We got to show a clip from 77. And I'm going to include the audio problems and include the introduction because I want us to get the feeling. After all, one of the subjects of our very podcast is the feeling of things, the impressions, the senses of things, much more so than sort of the summary of things. Or I'm going to get close to it. So let's go back and let's see. I'm going to run this a little bit. San Francisco State University, Cesar Chavez. It's introduced by this poet, Larry McNamara, I think. McNamara? Yeah. 77. Here we go. This is a treat. This is a lost film, so it's really a treat.
His reader is one of America's most distinguished writers. She's the author of Play It As It Lays, Slouching Toward Bethlehem. She has a new book coming out next month, which is called A Book of Common Prayer. This is the first time she has ever given a reading of her work. So I'd like you all to give a big, warm welcome to Miss Joan Didion.
Notice the very humble, this little banner here. It's not slick. I mean, it's very different than, for example, the videos of her at the Y in New York in 2004, or different than her getting the Medal of Honor from President Obama. Different, this is the artistic community. So even though she's a big writer, she's written for some of the biggest magazines and newspapers. She's still, like her husband, is connected to the world of the arts and poetry. And we're gonna listen to her read a passage twice, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about what she's doing as an author, and were her style, some of the influences and some of the effects, the feelings, as I always talk about the feeling, what it feels like to hear prose like this, or read prose like this. Here we go. Something fun. You have to adjust the mic. Here we go.
I'm going to start reading at the beginning of this book because that way you'll know what's happening, and when I stop, it will.
So she says, I want to begin at the beginning of this book so you know what's happening. Now, it's interesting to compare. Again, I don't want to interrupt too much, but some little bit more context. She always talked about how she used her physical body and her presence and its uniqueness to get the story. She's, in this sense, the opposite of Tom Wolfe. Tom Wolfe dressed similarly to me, actually, in many respects. The white suit and reporting on all kinds of stock car races and, sneaking into Leonard Bernstein's house and going here and going there and talking to all sorts of people, going down to Wall Street in the 80s with the traders. Always stuck out and was very conspicuous in his three-piece suits, very formal. And because Tom Wolfe was so formal and so outlandish, so flamboyant, everybody was relaxed around him. They were so relaxed because they figured this guy's from another planet. Doesn't matter because he's so eccentric. I can be myself. In other words, the guard is let down because there's, in a way, the apartness or separateness of Tom Wolfe, the journalist, meant there was no competition because it doesn't. Joan Didion uses the exact opposite strategy. And that opposite strategy yields the same result. Uses her person. She always discussed that. And there's a letter between her and EveBabitz, and EveBabitz is sort of taunts her, teases her a little bit, said, Joan Didion, if you didn't look as you looked, in other words, if you weren't stacked like I am, EveBabitz, with big tits and buxom and all this sort of thing, would you be able to do what you do? And that's a whole, we won't belabor that point now, but it's using her presence in the world. You can see that. It's not. Let's go. Book of Common Prayer.
It's called a Book of Common Prayer, and this is part 1. I will be her witness. That would translate Sere su testigo and will not appear in your traveler's phrase book because it is not a useful phrase for the prudent traveler. Here is what happened. She left one man, she left a second man, she traveled again with the first, she let him die alone. Oh, can you hear me better now? Okay. I just want to make sure I'm hitting someplace that...
A side note, when I saw, this very much connects. When I went to a screening of my old acquaintance friend, Ross McElwee, the North Carolinian, New England documentary filmmaker, it was a screening at Harvard Film Archive in 07, 08. He brought a 16mm copy of his film Charlene, which is about a poetry teacher, great poet Charlotte Swansea, North Carolina, public school poetry teacher from the 70s and 80s. And it's a portrait of his friend Charlene. And about 5 minutes in, the film breaks. It was like one of the few film breaks, and they had to tape it together. And Ross McElwee gets up and he stands in front of all of us. He says, "You just had a 1970s experience." By which he meant that in the 70s, things would break down a lot. Tech would break down, and you just accept it, 16mm. This is a little bit of what we're...
Okay, I'm going to start over.
Start over. Good.
I will be her witness.
I will be her witness.
That would translate Sere su testigo and will not appear in your traveler's phrase book because it is not a useful phrase for the prudent traveler. Here's what happened. She left one man, she left a second man, she traveled again with the first, she let him die alone. She lost one child to history and another to complications. I offer in each instance the evaluation of others. She imagined herself capable of shedding that baggage, and she came to Boca Grande, a tourist, una turista. So she said. In fact, she came here less a tourist than a sojourner, but she did not make that distinction. She made not enough distinctions. She dreamed her life. She died hopeful. In summary, so you know the story. Of course, the story had extenuating circumstances, weather, cracked sidewalks, and peregrina, but only for the living. Charlotte would call her story one of passion. I believe I would call it one of delusion. My name is Grace Strasser Mandana, née Tabor, and I have been for 50 of my 60 years a student of delusion, a prudent traveler from Denver, Colorado. My mother died of influenza one morning when I was 8. My father died of gunshot wounds, not self-inflicted, one afternoon when I was 10. From that afternoon until my 16th birthday, I lived alone in our suite at the Brown Palace Hotel. I have lived in equatorial America since 1935 and only twice had fever. I am an anthropologist who lost faith in her own method, who stopped believing that observable activity defined anthropos.
I hate to pause her here, but there's so much there already. I had a husband, I had a first husband, a second husband, I married, I'm an anthropologist. This and a this and a this and a this. I did this, I did that. You notice the hypnotic? This is incantation. This is this is actually a mode of writing. We're going to get into our grammar stuff now because it's all important. It's hypotaxis. I'm sorry, parataxis. It's opposite. Paratectic. This and then this and then the So it creates a feeling of one thing and then another thing and then another thing and then another thing. And it's the prose style and rhetoric of the Bible. Most spiritual traditions and literature around the world, actually. And it's marked paratectic mode is marked by kind of an inequality of elements because you don't arrange. Of course, it's opposite hypotaxis. You arrange everything. The author creates a hierarchy, and you show the connections, and you evaluate more. And now she's saying, I can't trust what I'm doing anymore. But notice the very first thing she says is, I will be your witness. She uses the word witness. And it's a novel. And the novel is titled The Book of Common Prayer. These are not accidental. Joan Didion, although she's never said or was associated with any particular denomination of belief, is a deeply, deeply spiritual writer. Using that word in its largest, more capacious sense of not a denomination or not a particular belief or of what God is or isn't, but an attitude towards the world. And she actually has, through her whole career, whether she's writing about John Wayne, Nancy Reagan, Martha Stewart, HaightAshbury, Jim Morrison, The Doors, Ronald Reagan, Dukakis. I mean, these are all things she wrote about. She wrote about them, I think, with not entirely, but partly this kind of spiritual attitude, which is an approach where, you have your subject. Your subject could be Michael Dukakis' campaign, which she wrote about, or it could be the Reagan Revolution, which she wrote about, and political fictions, or The History of California, which she wrote about and Where I Come From, which is her self-criticism or her kind of, catching herself. Where did I go wrong with my being? She's in a sense calling into question her Goldwater Republican roots. We'll get to that in future episodes. We're gonna talk about her being a Goldwater girl, which was the term. There were two famous Goldwater girls, Hillary Clinton and Joan Didion, and their journey was quite similar in terms of where they moved over their lifetime. In 1980, Joan Didion leaves the Republican Party because of Ronald Reagan and joins the Democratic Party, which is significant and not to be overlooked. But like all the greatest artists, she can't be put into a category, not liberal or conservative or socialist or right-wing or left-wing. She wants to be independent in thought, and she wants to reach her own conclusions. If you read her piece on Terri Schiavo, she writes a piece on the whole right to die, right to life, abortion. This whole essay on Terri Schiavo case, nobody reads that piece is really happy with what she does, because she's never tells you pull the plug, don't pull the plug. She doesn't. That's the last thing. She's not interested in that piece on what to think or what to do. She's interested in her major interest, as it always is more what we would say now meta. She's interested in why are we thinking about the story the way that we are. Not the facts of the case or the story. Let's put aside facts. She's asking, why do we think of it this way? In thinking of it this way, is our mode or our way of thinking been conditioned and taught to us? Is it habit? Should we change it? It's sort of more that, which is, after all, an aesthetic way of looking at things. It's an artist's way of looking at things. Artists are not always so interested in answering questions. They're interested in, is it a good question? And does the question yield more fruitful further questions? It's not about reaching a conclusion or a sentence, which is why there's this incantation, this kind of, let's hear a little bit more of it.
Under Crobert, California, and worked with Levi Strauss, Sao Paulo. Classified several societies, cataloged their rights and attitudes on occasions of birth, copulation, initiation, and death, did extensive and well-regarded studies on the rearing of female children in the Mato Grosso and along certain tributaries of the Rio Zingo, and still I did not know why any one of those female children did or did not do anything at all. Let me go further. I do not know why I did or did not do anything at all.
So, I don't know what I'm doing. And this is a novel, after all. It's not a work of nonfiction. Although work like Joan Didion's does call into question the fiction-nonfiction divide, the memoir, biography, autobiographical divide, we would say today creative nonfiction. This is a novel. Charlotte's an invented person. It may be like Joan Didion. It might not be like Joan Didion. But I think it's important to start off, as I did here, with these two modes, parataxis and hypotaxis. Now, hypotaxis is actually what we spent all those months with John Updike. That's the writing style of a Henry James. Proust, Marcel Proust. Lots of subordinate clauses. Why are clauses subordinate? Because you've arranged a hierarchy. Instead of one thing sort of flat next to another thing, you arrange it. And it's about the craft of the arranging. And neither of these modes is better or worse than the other. They both have their uses. I mean, the mode she's employing, the style she's employing, has been greatly abused by the advertising industry and by religious cults, actually, unfortunately. And yet it's one of the greatest modes you can do as a writer, because it's rooted in the Bible and in, so that's, and so just to show you that everything comes from somewhere, I'm going to read one of the most famous passages in English literature. You've heard it before. You'll see where I'm going with this. And that's, of course, Charles Dickens' Bleak House, which is very close to what Didion is doing, actually. So I'm going to read the fog paragraph. Sue me, kill me. That's what I'm going to do. Another term is accidentant. So accidentant and polyaccidentant are two modes of, do you leave out conjunctions or do you include conjunctions? That is and that. So this is one, again, really famous, but let's go with it. Fog everywhere. Fog up the river where it flows among green aits and meadows. Fog down the river where it rolls defiled among the tears of shipping and the waterside pollutions of a great and dirty city. Fog on the Essex marshes. Fog on the Kentish heights. Fog creeping into the cabooses of collier brigs. Fog lying out on the yards and hovering in the rigging of great ships. Fog drooping on the gunwales of barges and small boats. Fog in the eyes and throats of ancient Greenwich pensioners, wheezing by the firesides of their wards. Fog in the stem and bowl of the afternoon pipe of the wrathful skipper down in the close cabin. Fog cruelly pinching the toes and fingers of his shivering little apprentice boy on deck. Chance people on the bridges peeping over the parapets into another sky of fog, with fog all around them, as if they were in a balloon and hanging in the misty clouds. And so repetition, fog of words, laying one thing next to another thing from a sequence. Let's see where we are here. One second. So that's Dickens' Bleak House. That is one way of doing it. It's interesting to think about this very public reading of younger Joan Didion than she would be in the 2000s. Reading from the Book of Common Prayer. One of the things I want to say too is that I mentioned spirituality in her writing. You have a subject, so this is what I think is a sort of a dance with three steps. You have a subject. Let's say the subject is, I don't know, it could be anything. Let's say the subject, okay, let me my own personal life. Let's say the subject is coming from Boston to Weaverville. That's a subject in 2017. So when you have that subject, let's say you report, you have all of these facts that you realized you had to come down here in Weaverville, North Carolina in Thanksgiving time. So you learn this discovery the week of Thanksgiving. So there's that. And you could talk about what the weather was like in Boston, you know, the different conversations you had and what's going on. Planning. You could talk about, I could talk about coming at 2 a.m, entering this town in the middle of the night. This town with hardly any population, and the darkness and the lights of the car, you know, and the winding mountains and you know, that. It's very powerful. Now, those are kind of the facts of the thing, you know? You got that? Now, what an artist, a poet does, and this is all artists and poets, even, you know, I don't even think that, you know, hardcore news reporters even though that style and genre is very different, I don't even think that they're exempt from this. They have to deal with this too. They may not, it may not be as important, but it's them too. All writers, you take all that stuff, and you have to construct syntax, the tools of prose, sentences, paragraphs, chapters, And in constructing that, you're leaving behind, to a profound degree, the world, at least the world of facts. And you're crafting something. Okay? That's step 2. Step 3. You have a crafted thing like this, reading about this fictional character, Charlotte. She was an anthropologist. She married many times. I had a husband. By the way, humor is really important. So the rhythm of I had a husband, this kind of, I think a technical term in linguistics, when you undersell things or when you minimize things that are supposedly more important. I mean, there's irony. These are the things that make her better than most other writers, I have to say. Her husband does it too. When we get to Vegas, he does, anyhow, you're crafting recognizable writing. Number 3 is that crafted thing is released into the world, and we read it, hopefully read it, and maybe even hear an author speak it. And when that happens, we have the art object there. And when that happens, we then reflect upon our very human condition, which cannot happen when you're in direct reality, of course. I mean, it can, but it's not as, it's not as free from obstacles, right? And in the making of a thing, it's, you're creating and so that reflect upon what it is to be human is that 3rd step. And that's what we're always doing. And so when you're Joan Didion and you're writing about the death of your own daughter, Quintana, or the death of her husband, John, she's going to do that. She's going to craft a work of prose. Let me turn this off. A work of prose. And it's that work, if we're going to appreciate Joan Didion, comprehend, understand Joan Didion, enter into her after all artists have a worldview. They have a universe. We're entering her universe in this episode and in future episodes. We got to deal with that. And we got to enter into that text. And there's a lot there. And these books I have here, these different books, like this book. Our friend Richard Lanham's Analyzing Prose. These are supplements, or they're additions that, can enrich, if used properly, of course, our appreciation and, the value of a Joan Didion. And that's just one example, of course. And there are many examples like this in music and other things. And that's what I hope to do in this series. This series is going to be, as I said, 4 episodes. Originally was going to have it be 3, but I think 4 is a good amount. I'm not going to talk about, it's not going to be a comprehensive examination of all of her life and work. It can't be. It's going to focus on these books. It did start off with, as I said before, this all comes back to this book, believe it or not, this whole series. So, Sex and Rage. So that goes to show that anytime I'm sort of planning a series or an episode, you can change your mind. You could say, well, I love EveBabitz. I actually do think she's an underrated writer. And she has an interesting trajectory. We could spend basically 12 episodes on just her. And I would willingly do so, except sometimes we are inspired by what I call current events. And this is current event. This came out. I thought, that's interesting, because this is something that was never meant to be seen by anybody. It was just shared between her psychiatrist or therapist, and when she was alive, Quintana's psychiatrist and therapist. Very private, very intimate. And that's what got me the idea of, wouldn't it be interesting to do a series on the relationship between writing for pure use or utility and writing as an art form, as an art object. And those differences are important, and their relationship. So while we're on the subject, I'm going to open this book and I'm going to read some of her notes. And I don't know what to read here. I don't know where to begin. This is, again, the years, some things marked here. This is, let's say 1999, 2000. 2000. Yeah, here we go. This is, let's get the right year here. I always want to get the right year. 2000 March. And she's recounting, don't you love these Post-it notes? I'm so analog, I'm still using these. I mean, don't worry, I'm not using liquid paper or whiteout, although, who knows? I have a copy over here. I mean, I have a not a copy, I have a little bottle of whiteout. So we're gonna, but I just want to give you the sense of her writing. So what is the context? The context is a mother, Joan Didion, talking to a professional about her family, her daughter. And so, let's see here. This is a quote of this doctor, and that's who the he is in the. And he's one of the things about this text that's really interesting. There's many interesting things about this, but one that, and I'm going to discuss this in future episodes with a special guest. Joanne Davis Woods is going to be a guest in one of the episodes, because she has some first editions of Joan Didion we're going to discuss. But one of the things is, this is a very hands-on therapist. He's very, how to put this, very explicit in advice giving. And this entire book is filled with his opinions and advice and beliefs and philosophies. And it's very explicit and very complex. And some of it I read, I thought, well, yeah, that makes sense to me. Some of it shocked me. We can't cover all of it in this series, but just give you a sense of that. He starts off, you don't understand. You don't. This is Dr. What's his name? McKinnon? What's the name of the doctor? Get his name. Yeah, McKinnon. McKinnon says, you don't understand. You think, he's talking to Joan Didion, you think she sees you as you see yourself. Somebody who overcame a lot of fears to get where you are. I suspect that you and your husband also see yourselves as extremely lucky, in that each has this others to support your risks, make them in effect less risky. She doesn't see you that way. She sees you as some exalted, super talented being. She thinks you were born the way you are now. You know, like the Lady Gaga song, Born That Way, right? Born the way you are now. Programmed from conception to succeed. I think you need to talk to her about the support you and your husband give each other, and about the support you get from editors or whoever, about how your first bad review made you feel, your first turn down, about everything that went into getting where you are, about being afraid you wouldn't make it. Tell her that story about the agent. It's a reference to when an agent, not a positive story about Joan Didion. And then Joan writes to herself, or to John, her husband, I said I thought it would be enormously helpful to her to find a professional mentor, somebody she would want to please, somebody who would expect things from her. Absolutely it would, he said. Someone outside the family. And at the moment, Dr. Cass is playing that role. Perfect transference. So this is Freudian language in the text, you know, this transference and all these things. This is, that's basically her saying, what do I do about Quintana? How do I solve, you know, these various problems in my family? And that's a window. When we read that, we're reading the most intimate window into their lives. And so I found this really really useful. Now, when the doctor talks about couple helping each other, he's actually referring, believe it or not, back to our friend Vegas here. Because this book, when we get to it, this is the most graphic, I don't want to say men behaving badly, but, you know, sort of 70s wild. It's one of the things I love about this novel. It was revealed that she actually helped edit some of this. So they're separated, but they're still editing each other's work, reading and appreciating each other's work. They wrote together one of the greatest screenplays of the 1970s. Actually, well, I was going to say Panic in Needle Park, about junkies. Wonderful film, but also many other films together. They wrote My Favorite Star is Born. I know I'm the weirdo. It's my favorite. The one with Chris Christopherson and Barbara Streisand from '76. They wrote that. But, you know, this is, he said, you know, she helped, and also he does the same thing for her when she wrote some of her more difficult, like this book, Common Prayer. Actually, at the very end of John Gregory's life, he picked up this book of Common Prayer, and there's a passage in this book where he says, Joan, speaking to his wife, you're such a wonderful writer. You're so great. And then he's going to die 8 days later. It's actually quoted. Yeah, let me get this out. He picks it up. Where are we here? Oh, goodness, where is it? Yeah, here we go. December 5th, 2003, Joan Didion's 69th birthday. She and Dunne were in their living room, passing a snowy evening. And this comes from, again, I mentioned her before. This is We Tell Ourselves Stories. Joan Didion and the American Dream Machine. This is a really, really good book. Alyssa Wilkinson is a reporter. She's actually a film critic of the New York Times. Now but also writes a lot about many issues. And And so it's Joan Didion's birthday, and you know they're watching this, and then Dunne picks up a Book of Common Prayer, the novel we just mentioned, and it says here he'd been rereading it to see how it worked on a technical level. So this is a man that on his wife's birthday is doing homework, and his homework is rereading his wife's novel to learn from her prose and to appreciate the secrets on her 69th birthday. He's studying her prose. This is what our show's about. Biography is important. Of course, all these things from life are very important. But the most important thing is husband and wife, Joan and John, working and helping each other's prose in a partnership. And him saying, I can never write. He basically all but says, I've never written anything as good as you did in this novel. And telling her that on her birthday. And that's that anecdote from Wilkinson's text. And on that, I think we're going to, good place to stop at our introduction to Joan Didion and John Gregory Dunne, and notes to John, and this series for BookLunch. And like and subscribe to our show, and there are future shows to come, including a concert this Monday. So tune in. Thank you.